beginning of a three-part HORAN webinar series discussing the mystical and often confusing world of pharmacy benefit management. Today's seminar, titled PBM 101, Laying the Foundation, is the first step into increasing your understanding of PBMs and provide the groundwork for our future series. PBM 201, where we will discuss pricing, profits, and carve-outs, and then we'll finish up with PBM 301, which we will talk about formulary management strategies and best practice contract language, and then we will have a meeting, a live seminar later in May. My name is Michael Jeffries. And I'm a VP and consultant with HORAN. As a subject matter expert in the healthcare sector, I work with clients on finding better ways to impact benefit spend, from market innovation, new ways to communicate, or better processes that will make a difference in my clients' business and plan members. Joining me today for color commentary and questions is Judi McKie, who is also a VP and consultant. Judi.
And I am a trailblazer, benefits expert with more than 23 years of industry experience. I have my clients' best interests at heart and protect their dollars as if they were my own. I'm a strategic partner, and I seek to understand your goals, unique needs, and culture. And thank you, everybody, for being here today.
A couple of housekeeping items before we get into the presentation. We will be aggregating your questions during the presentation, and if we still have questions at the end of the webinar, if they haven't been addressed, we will answer them then. In addition, for the CE credit certificate eligibility, that's going to be based on viewing time. So you have to stick through the entire webinar in order for it to be eligible, so you can't just log in for 10 minutes and log back out. Sorry, those are the rules. Learning objectives. What do you want to get out of the next hour? We want to do some translating for you. We want to go through and help you understand some of the common terms inside the PBM world. We're going to talk about PBMs and what do they actually do. Clinical programs. What are you paying for and what's the strategy and impact of implementing those? We want to address specialty meds. What makes them special? Why are they so expensive? And then finish up with illustrating the money flow and helping you understand the contract relationship between employer, the pharmacy benefit manager, and the pharmacy manufacturer. So what's the function of a PBM? Well, to start, they run the pharmacy benefit side of the health plan, whether it's a fully insured plan, you're an ASO self-insured plan, or you're a self-funded plan through a third-party administrator. Ultimately, what they're trying to do is they're trying to reduce costs and maximize incomes. That starts with claim processing. They're responsible for adjudicating the claims based on your plan design and making sure that they are accumulating towards your out-of-pocket maximums. They are also involved with managing the network of pharmacies. So that includes actually building the networks, as well as negotiating the contracts with those pharmacies on how drugs will be distributed, as well as services offered. In addition, they're developing and managing the formularies. Now, formularies is one of the common terms we're going to get to in a couple of minutes, but it involves building the drug list, in addition to building and implementing the clinical programs that are designed to impact and contain pharmacy spend. And lastly, they're negotiating the pharmacy prices, the drug prices directly with the manufacturers that go into the discounts that go into your contract. That includes the rebates, which we will also talk about. Thing to remember, that PBMs, that these are for-profit entities. So they are in the business of making money, and they do make large sums, and that's where we're trying to increase the knowledge of the PBM world so you understand where the margin areas are so that we can make sure that you have the best contract in place. So who are the PBMs? Who are the players? The first three you see, the ones you're probably most common, most recognized, and that's CVS Caremark, that's through Aetna. You have Express Scripts, also known as ESI, and then you have OptumRx, which is associated with United Healthcare. But there are other PBMs. And these other PBMs, they are smaller in nature, maybe have less volume. There's things as Humana Pharmacy Solutions, you have Mid-Impact, Prime Therapeutics, and then we have a catch-all of all others. All others also includes those that just do cash pay. The first three I pointed out, the reason they're probably familiar to you is They represent 76% of the total pharmacy claim volume. It's a graphical representation, lets you know how they all get split out by carrier. Thing to keep in mind is Express Scripts was bought by Cigna in late 2018, which is part of one of the trends we're starting to see in the marketplace that we will be talking about. Another big change is in 2019, we had an addition of a new PBM, and that is IngenioRx with Anthem. Now, historically, Anthem has always worked with Express Scripts, but since they separated, Anthem wanted to go their own direction with Ingenio, and that's when Cigna came in and integrated with ESI. Current trends, what we see going on in the marketplace. First one is we're seeing more and more PBMs integrating with the medical carriers. So examples that I just mentioned in the prior slide, we had Cigna merge with Express Scripts, you had Anthem launch their in-house with Ingenio, and then you also have CVS that acquired Aetna. Why are they integrating? Well, from a carrier perspective, they'll tell you that one of the benefits is that it helps save money. By having the PBM and medical under the same roof, what that allows for is economies of scale, elimination of charges that historically have been in place for integration, and it helps with more robust and complete reporting. It also helps the patients, because again, now you have integration. You have medical and RX under one roof, so both sides can see what's going on at the same time. That leads to ideas around new formulary and product availability, because they argue that there's a synergy, that when separated, they have great ideas. When they come together, they have even better ideas. And then lastly is leverage. More negotiating power. When you have more bodies available, when you go and you start talking to the manufacturers, that helps with better discounts, and those better discounts get translated into stronger contracts. However, with all of these benefits from a carrier perspective, there are a few concerns. This trend starts to create a smaller market. There are less players out there. And when you have less options, that minimizes that employer flexibility to switch to a standalone PBM or look for more of a tailored fit. Because essentially, it's going to come down to you have 5 large corporations basically running the insurance: Anthem, Cigna, CVS Health, and United Healthcare. Another trend. RX manufacturers are extending their patents. Now, why are they trying to extend their patents? Really simple. They want to keep competition at bay, and they want to earn back their costs for inventing the drugs, and they want to continue to reap the huge benefits for as long as humanly possible. Put things into perspective on bringing a drug to market that gets the patent. The average cost to bring a prescription to market is just over $1.3 billion. And yes, that was a B. That patent for that drug lasts typically 20 years. In order to extend it to 20 years, you'll see that manufacturers will go through a process called reformulation. Reformulation can come in different areas. The first being, you switch the drug from one version to another. An example of that is that the initial drug, when it came out, required you to take it 2 times a day, but if they're able to improve and upgrade, and now you need to take it 1 time a day, that's switching from one version to another. It also could include going from a capsule to a tablet. It could also be from mode of administration. But you also have recycling for other similar indications. What that means is they're figuring out something else for it to work on. So a prescription that was designed to treat clinical depression, they figured out they can now use it to treat ADHD. That allows for extension of patent. And the third major is the argument of protecting steps in production and manufacturing. By going through reformulation, by implementing these sort of strategies, that keeps the generic market from coming into play. Because those sort of switches, what that does with the generic, is that generic is no longer a bioequivalent. So it can't be absorbed in the body at the same rate from when they switch from 2 times a day to 1 time a day. Or it's not therapeutically equivalent, meaning that generic was designed to treat option A, but they figure out a way for it to treat something else. This keeps competition at bay, it allows them exclusivity, and they continue to reap large profits. However, the regulators are raising the bar as far as what it takes to extend the patents. The idea is it's in the interest of competition, and they're trying to keep their drug costs down.
Michael, who bears the cost of research for new drugs entering the market?
That's a great question. The U.S. So when we're talking about extending patents and we're talking about pharmacy, it's on a global scale. So it's not something that's just unique to the U.S. market. These drugs are being sold and being utilized around the world. But we, as the U.S., are bearing the burden of those research costs because we look at them differently than what the other countries do.
And what is the process and timing of a brand drug being introduced as a generic?
So once the brand, if they don't get their patent extension and it goes to generic, they get a 6-month window where there's what they call a single source generic. What that does is that delays the full generic volume from coming into play, so you don't necessarily get the reduction in cost that generics are designed to do. So it gives them a little bit longer to earn the larger margin that they have, but once that 6 months runs out, then you can have multiple players come into the game, and that's when you see the relief on the pharmacy costs.
And there's also the fact that sometimes you don't get enough manufacturers and create the competition, so sometimes a generic doesn't reduce the cost as dramatically as others.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Market competition is a good thing. Another trend, pharmacogenomics, what we call precision medicine. It's also known as tailored medicine. What pharmacogenomics does is it's a blood test that is used to determine how the genes affect a person's response to medications. Now, that seems a little convoluted explanation. I think, Judy, you probably have a better way of putting it.
So essentially, it's how the body metabolizes the medication and your reaction to that specific medication.
Precisely. So what do we mean by that? Well, depending on your genetic makeup, some prescriptions work more or less effectively. Now, what would cause something to work more or less effectively? Be such items as metabolism. If you have low metabolism or high metabolism, you're not hitting the target of the effectiveness of the drug. Same thing could apply if you have high blood pressure, poor diet, you have high BMI, or you have some genetic predisposition. It's a way of trying to figure out what barriers get in the way to prevent that prescription from optimizing its intended outcome. Plus, your genetic makeup can produce more or fewer side effects. So such things as headache, insomnia, dry mouth, drowsiness. What we find in our book of business when we look at pharmacy spend is when we see members that are on multiple prescriptions per month, what we find is the back half of the prescription, so say they're taking 4 or 5 scripts, the last 3 or 4 typically are to offset the side effects of the primary. So this gives the opportunity to find the right drug at the right time and the right dosage to eliminate the need of the side effects and the need to medicate to prevent.
Michael, are insurance companies covering this test today?
What we don't really see a full-scale adoption from the medical side, specifically on the fully insured platform. The reason being is these drugs, they run anywhere from $250 to $500 a test. And if the fully insured market were to include coverage for these tests, it would push up the rates for that fully insured model. And for the employer to get the real bang for the buck, they would need all of their employees or all their plan members to participate in said drug, in said test. However, what we're starting to see on the self-funded side is we're seeing more companies looking at adopting this and offering it not to everyone, but more on a targeted basis to test drive to figure out how effective it is and communicate and then roll it out in a more expansive fashion. So the goals of pharmacogenomics, I think they're pretty clear. First one is you want to save patients time and money. They save time and money by they're taking less drugs. They're taking less drugs. That's less dollars out of their budget or their pocketbook. Also, from a trial and error standpoint, that whole approach, well, it's a pain in the neck. It's incredibly frustrating, and it produces waste. So rather than trying a drug for 20 of the 30 days and realizing it's not working or it's having a side effect, and then having to go and try another drug, well, we've just created waste on 10 days of that 30-day supply. Plus, that's money not well spent because now you're going to have to try a different drug. Ultimately, what they're trying to do is they want to find the best drug from the very beginning. So to simplify, a simple explanation, what pharmacogenomics is trying to do is help people figure out the right dose of the right drug for the right indication for the right patient at the right time. So future trends, what's going on, what we see upcoming on the horizon? First is increasing transparency. That's the hot buzzword right now. Everybody wants to pull the veil back. They want to understand what's going into the cost. Now, HHS, Health and Human Services, they put forth a proposal that includes some new rules that are designed to increase the transparency on pricing. The first one involves rebates. Currently, when rebates are paid out, and we'll define rebates here in a couple of slides, they are either kept by the PBM, the Pharmacy Benefit Manager, or they are shared or passed directly through to the employer. It's either the PBM or the employer that bear the benefit of the rebate. But this proposal suggests that the rebates bypass the employer and they go directly to the employee or the plan member to help make their drugs more affordable, help reduce their copays, if any, and help those that are on high deductibles that have to pay the discounted costs for those items.
And Michael, as they continue to look at legislation, how will the elimination of rebates have an impact on employers? Well,
it's going to have a negative impact because a lot of rebate money is used to help offset cost, and it's also deductible from an employer standpoint. If that's now being redirected from the employer down to the member wins, but to the detriment of the employer budget. Outcome. Now we're going to see more outcome-based contracts. Outcome-based contracts are more common and probably more familiar on the medical side of the plan. And the way that we're starting to see it being adopted on the pharmacy side is, the PBMs are now holding the manufacturers more accountable. So an outcome, in a simple example, an outcome-based contract would involve the PBM buying that drug at a certain price. And if a certain metric is hit, meaning a large enough group of patients are impacted and they saw reduced cost or minimized cost for the condition that the drug is designed to be treated, then the manufacturer provides them with a refund on the original purchase price of those prescriptions. So it involves them to hold their feet to the fire. Starting to see more innovation in PBM strategies. Specifically, we're seeing a lot more conversation about the exclusion of specialty drugs from the larger formulary lists. The idea behind excluding the specialty drugs is by excluding them off of the formulary, it allows plan members to maximize the manufacturer coupon or financial assistance programs, allowing them to reduce, minimize, or often eliminate the cost that they have for those drugs. So that strategy wins on both sides. So it allows the plan member to have reduced costs, but also removes the rest of the costs off of the plan, which reduces the employer outlay. And then we're seeing new entries, new players coming in. So Amazon and JP Morgan, they've gotten into the distribution and reimbursement market. Example would be Amazon. They recently bought PillPack. So PillPack is a home delivery pharmacy for chronic conditions. And what it does is it delivers pre-sorted packaging for those that have multiple scripts. So when they receive the delivery, it actually has an individual packet that lists the drug, what the dosage is, and when you're supposed to take it. So it's supposed to help organize and increase adherence and reduce costs for those that are taking multiple prescriptions.
And Michael, what is the procedures or processes to protect people's PHI and security as these new players enter?
Yeah, that's kind of the worry when we have these new players that aren't traditionally part of the medical world, is they think that there's this low barrier of entry for these sort of solutions. Well, there isn't. There's very strict regulations around HIPAA compliance when you start to deal with this sort of information. And so PillPack, for example, meets those regulations and it was actually approved. And JP Morgan and Amazon are actually working in conjunction on a new product right now that's in the middle of review to see if it meets those HIPAA regulations. So a good thing about entering new players is it provides some opportunity for reduced costs, but be rest assured that the proof of HIPAA compliance is paramount in order for these to be allowed to be offered on the market. So speaking the language, so I've used some of the common terms in the first few slides, so let's actually delve a little deeper in and talk about what they mean. First is your brand name. Now your brand name, in most cases, still under patent protection, which means it's the only manufacturer that has a specific name by the drug maker. Some of those examples probably look familiar to you: Prilosec, Flonase, and Prozac. Generic. With generics are less expensive than the brand. However, the generic has the same active ingredient as the original. So you'll see one of the examples under generic is omeprazole. Omeprazole is the active ingredient inside of Prilosec. That's a prescription that is used to deal with heartburn. So the same active ingredient, the difference is if there may be a slight difference in how it's made, what color it is, which is a big deal. That's kind of a joke. Taste, packaging, but most importantly, it's still FDA approved. So it has the same security and the same protocol to go through as the brand name. They're able to offer it on a less expensive aspect, higher value. And you have specialty medications. Specialty medications, those are for chronic conditions. Humira is a good example. Those are biologics. They're most often injected, given through IV or taken by mouth. They don't necessarily come in the pill form. And the majority of special medications are brand name. There are a few generic, but overwhelming majority come from a brand standpoint.
And what's interesting about Humira, it's one of the top that almost every employer sees on their top prescription drug list by cost. And it was introduced for rheumatoid arthritis, but it also treats psoriasis and Crohn's. Exactly. So all very chronic conditions that require a continuance of this medication.
And Judi brings up a good point, because that's that reformulation I was talking about in the prior couple of slides. They found different indications that they can use for the same drug, which allows them to extend patent. Then you have your maintenance medications. These are drugs that you just take on a regular basis to treat chronic or long-term conditions. Common ones: high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. Maintenance medications come in brand name or generic. But you also have over-the-counter pharmacy. Those can be purchased without a prescription. They're not covered under most PBM plans because they shouldn't be covered. Because if you don't need a prescription for it, you can get over-the-counter. There's no need for the employer to take on the burden of that cost when it's available outside. Examples would be aspirin or ibuprofen. I mentioned rebates. So rebates come into play. It's a return of a portion of the purchase price from the drug manufacturer to the PBM. They offer these rebates as incentives for the PBMs to have their drugs listed on their formulary list. It applies primarily to brand name. As I mentioned before, that amount can either be kept by the PBM, in which case them keeping all the rebates allow for deeper discounts in the employer contract, or they can share them with the client or pass them all the way through to the client. And our recommendation with our ASO customers and self-funded clients is that they always opt for that full pass-through to the client in the interest of transparency. Speaking the language further, let's talk about some list types. So the formulary. So what's your formulary? That's the drug list. Now that's not all medications, it's just those that are covered. PBMs have multiple formularies, options to choose from, and the different options come with different restrictions. That formulary is the basis for tiering. So the tiering determines how much copay you pay based on the drug that's being selected. So for a tier 1, those are typically your generics. They have the lowest copay. They have the lowest copay because they're the least expensive, most effective. You have tier 2, which is a higher copay than tier 1. Those are typically your preferred brand name. Tier 3, higher copay than tier 2. Those are typically your non-preferred brand. Non-preferred means that there are other preferred brands or generics available that treat the same condition at a lower price point. And then you have tier 4, which is the highest copay, often seen as a percentage of the discounted cost with a minimum and a maximum. And that's the bucket where you see the specialty fall into play.
And Michael, how does the tiering of drugs apply to a high deductible health plan?
That's a good point. So for those on a high deductible health plan, you still have drugs that are in tiers, but under the high deductible, you're not allowed to have the copay until you have the minimum, until you've met the minimum deductible. So if you're underneath your deductible, you still pay the discounted cost for the drug. It still falls into whatever tier it's falling into. But for some plan designs that have, say, a copay plan after the deductible, then they would have the opportunity to use the copays depending on what tier the drug is on. So the types of formularies. There's an open formulary. An open formulary is just that. It's the drug list that covers all the eligible prescriptions. It's probably the least strategic. It provides the most cost exposure, but it comes with the least amount of disruption. But if there's an open formulary, then wait for it. It's got to be a closed formulary. So closed formulary, it is a drug list, but that drug list says it only covers what's sitting on the list. And it might have medical exceptions for coverage. For those who have a closed formulary, if a plan member purchases a drug that's not sitting on that formulary, then they are responsible for paying the full cost of that drug. The closed formulary is designed to reduce costs, and it does. But when you start to reduce costs through closed formularies, it starts to come with disruption. And this disruption is in two basic aspects. First kind of disruption is a drug that might have been covered under the open formulary is no longer covered at all. The reason it's no longer covered underneath the closed formulary is there's a generic alternative available for it. But the other disruption is you go to a closed formulary, and it could be a drug switch tiers. So it was a tier 2 drug, might have moved to a tier 3 drug, meaning higher copays for the members, and that's when you hear most of the noise from an HR standpoint.
Can an employer decide what drugs to cover or exclude?
Under the fully insured, no, they do not. The formulary is the formulary. Under the ASO, technically they do have the right to determine what is on or not on a formulary. However, we strongly recommend not doing that because the formularies are built by doctors and clinical specialists, and they know the ins, the outs, and the risks of doing that formulary. And we just think that's a power that the employer shouldn't be using because it could open them up to some liability.
And isn't it also true that they can't exclude a single drug, but they could exclude a class like weight loss, infertility, but you can't just say I'm not going to cover this cancer drug or Humira? Yes.
If they're adamant about going down that route, it has to be by category. It can't be by specific drug. And then you have exclusions. Exclusions are just the prescriptions that aren't covered by the plan. Types of pharmacies. Three main types. First one is retail. Your retail is your physical, your brick and mortar pharmacy. They fill and dispense on both prescription and non-prescription medications. Examples can be the large chains. You have your CVS, you have Walmart, you have Kroger, but that can also include the smaller freestanding mom and pops. For example, Adrian Pharmacy.
And do all pharmacies have the same cost for each drug?
They don't. They don't. So the PBM, when they're negotiating the contracts with the pharmacy, depending on the size of the pharmacy, determines how much leverage they have in those negotiations. So the reimbursement that a pharmacy gets through, say, a CVS is probably larger than the reimbursement that a smaller freestanding clinic might have. Or they may not have as strong of dispensing fees available. Because again, it all comes back to scale. How many bodies that they have available for volume. Then you have your mail order. The mail order is they send medications through the mail. Often the members save money by going down that route. Typically, mail order comes in 90-day supplies versus what you see in retail, which is typically 30. Examples of mail order pharmacies are at home delivery as well as Walmart's mail order opportunity. When I talk about savings, it usually comes in the form of reduced copays. For example, if you were to go to the retail pharmacy to have a prescription filled, a 1-month supply, 30 days, would have a $30 copay. So if you got that filled 3 times, that would be $90, 30 bucks every time. However, if you were to do that one 90-day mail order through the mail order pharmacy, you'll see it's only $75. So there's a price break involved. So mail order pharmacy is designed to provide ease as well as produce lower costs. Then you have specialty pharmacy. With specialty pharmacy, they dispense specialty meds. It's not necessarily a physical location. Think of specialty pharmacy more as a distribution channel. Conditions. First, you have a chronic condition. So chronic conditions are conditions that keep coming back or they last a long time. They're treated through maintenance medications, and they're not the sort of condition that can be prevented by a vaccine or cured by a prescription. Something you have to take on a regular basis. Common examples are diabetes, asthma, or arthritis. Chronic conditions can be treated by both brand name and or generic drugs. But then you have the more severe chronic condition called a complex chronic condition. Now, a complex chronic condition, they require specialty medications. Common examples of a complex chronic condition: multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, or end-stage renal disease. With these complex chronic conditions, their treatment typically falls underneath the specialty brand category. Moving on to some cost containment strategies. First are drug tiers. We've talked about them in the previous slides. They have different out-of-pocket costs, and depending on tiers, you'll see grouped by generic, brand name, preferred, or non-preferred. The idea behind a drug tier is steerage through copays. They allow the members to navigate and find higher value treatments, lower copay for better value. Now, what determines what drug goes into tiers? Well, there's a handful of variables. First is just the cost of the drug. Is it relatively inexpensive, or is it high priced? But they also look at the cost of the drug and how it compares to others for the same treatment. You'll find that one in the prior slide we were talking about preferred versus non-preferred. Both brand names, but one can treat the same condition at a more effective price point. Then you have drug availability. How easy is it to get? What's the supply? Clearly, it'll supply and demand. If it's more readily available, it's less expensive to get versus something that would be less available, which becomes more expensive. Then they also look at the clinical effectiveness and the connections to the standard of care. What they're trying to figure out is, how well does the drug work? Does it work better than others? Does it work worse than others? And then lastly, you have others, kind of a catch-all. Those include such items as delivery methods. Is it time sensitive? Does it have storage requirements? Then you have prior authorization. Prior authorization is just getting permission. Now, that doesn't mean you're getting permission from the employer, you're getting permission from the PBM. And the permission that they're talking about, that prior auth, is trying to figure out if the drug is medically necessary or if it allows for other more cost-effective alternatives. Then you have step therapy. Step therapy is try this before that. It's also called step protocol or fail first. That typically involves the member has to try the generic first before they go to the name brand. And if the generic doesn't work, it becomes side effects, it's not as effective, the body's not processing it correctly, then that allows opportunity for them to go to more expensive prescriptions. This is one of those areas of disruption as well, but it does work from a cost containment standpoint. Then you have quantity limits. Quantity limits are, they just put limits on how much of the drug can be prescribed at one time. And the reason that they prescribe those is they want to prevent it from being misused, or it's only approved for short-term use. Some prescriptions, there's only 7 to 10 treatments. So if there's only 7 to 10 treatments, why would you prescribe 30 days? It could have dangerous side effects when it's overused. So if you over-prescribe for it and they're using it twice a day versus the once a day, that produces issues for the member. Also, something carries the risk of addiction. This is where the opioid abuse is a hot topic, because you're seeing historically that it was being issued in a larger quantity, so now they're putting more restrictions on it. And then you have the last, which is more of the come back and see me strategy. So they force you back to the physician for follow-up. So if you get prescribed that 90-day supply for that blood pressure, that cholesterol, before the doctor will prescribe the next round, they're going to make you come back in. They want to make sure that you're adhering to the medication. They want to see how it's working. They want to see how it coordinates with any other conditions and just your overall general health. So it's more of a gateway to get you to stay engaged with your primary care physician.
And Michael, one of the most common quantity limits is Imitrex. For migraines, I think you can only be prescribed like 6 a month.
Precisely, exactly. It's a very expensive drug, and you want to make sure you contain costs and it's used accordingly. So formula, why is the formulary important? Why do we need these drug lists? Well, the short answer is it provides guidance on the best value to treat your conditions. Overall best value. But the longer answer is, what's the basis for your tiered benefits? Now, we've been talking about 3 and 4 tier benefits. We're starting to see more traction in 5 and 6 tier benefits. You can also set that up to have without coverage exceptions or lifestyle management strategies. That's when you start getting into more of a closed formulary. So it gives you a defined amount of drugs to figure out what to include and what not to include from a clinical recommendation that's already been made by once you've built the formulary. When members use the formulary medications, they can expect to pay lower costs than those that are not on the formulary, right? Because if it's on the formulary, it's a discounted cost based on the manufacturer that the PBM negotiated in their contract, plus less expensive for you if you have a copay. Plus, this helps you find alternatives to higher cost options that provide similar outcomes. Helps them navigate, gives you a roadmap to understand what drugs do what and what side effects, what conditions, how can you locate. Most importantly, I think it's developed by pharmacy and therapeutic committees. So these specialists, as we talked about earlier, they are experts in the field of building these formularies, so they know what works and what doesn't work, and they look at it on a regular basis. They review those formularies to make sure that there's not any new interactions or there's any new clinical information along the way.
And some of the drugs that are excluded could be lifestyle drugs for weight loss or balding.
Exactly.
And there is a new trend in the last, 5 years that Botox can even be prescribed for migraines. So you're even seeing some of that treatment that's unusual.
Exactly. So when I talk about formal review of your formulary, your list can change over the course of the year. Now, wait, what? They can change my formulary list during the course of the contract? Yep. Typically do it once a year, but it's done in the best interest of the plan. So why do they make changes to the formulary during the course of the year? Here's a handful of reasons. One, FDA approves a new drug. There's something new to market, and it could be groundbreaking or it could be less expensive than another drug. Why wait until the plan renews when they can get it on the plan earlier? Or the FDA approves an existing drug as a treatment for a new disease. That's that reformulation we were talking about at the beginning. Or the drug goes over the counter. If it goes over the counter, you no longer need a prescription. Why do you still need to have it covered underneath the formulary? Remove it from the formulary and let it go over the counter. Or a brand name loses patent and generics become available. So now you have more options, less expensive, higher value. Let them get onto the plan earlier versus waiting for it to renew. But there's also safety concerns. One could be a drug could be withdrawn from the market for safety reasons. Recently discovered side effect. Determined that something is tainted. Maybe some of the reporting was flawed. Or the carrier just adjusted based on usage patterns. If they're starting to see abuse, if if they're starting to see a highly focused concentration of a certain drug and they realize it's being used for the wrong reason, they can make adjustments rather than having to wait over the course of the year.
And Michael, how does the carrier or the administrator communicate these changes to the employee and the employer?
Well, they'll let the employer know. So you get notification, whether you're fully insured or self-funded, to say, hey, there are these changes coming. Here's what the changes look like. Here's who's impacted. When I say who, just the volume. How many bodies would be impacted by it? And if it's being substituted, if there's a generic, what is the generic? But they do targeted communications with those specific members who are being impacted by those prescriptions and let them know that effective a certain date, the drug could move tiers, could be have a generic, could be any one of these possible reasons. Fully insured, the changes are the changes. They let you know, and then they let the membership know. Underneath the ASO, you're self-funded, you have the option not to adopt those changes. But we typically recommend that you do adopt the changes because they are done in the best interest of the plan. Clinical programs, why are they so important? They're designed to help patients help themselves. They want to help members effectively manage their health care. That way they're not trying to figure things out or do it alone. Longer is they're tailored to help them with their chronic conditions. So the emphasis is on using cost-effective medications, improving adherence, making sure that they're taking the drugs at the right place at the right time. They want to make sure that medical and RX are identifying opportunities to improve their care. Obviously, they want to optimize the clinical outcomes. They want to help maintain health status or improve. And then helping members connect with disease management, providing them with resources to let them know that there are programs out there that are available to help ease the burden of either taking the prescription or understanding how it integrates with the rest of their medical profile.
And what's interesting about new drugs that are coming out, as of the end of 2019, there were 38 new drugs under FDA review, which more drugs are coming at a faster speed to market, which will impact the RX trends. Exactly.
So the market is moving so quickly that I think you're going to start to see these adjustments or these introductions more than once a year, just because the research is so dynamic. Specialty RX, the expensive drugs, the super expensive drugs, hot topic right now. What is a specialty drug? A specialty drug is designed to treat a complex chronic condition that we talked about. They require a lot more clinical monitoring because they do have major side effects and they are very expensive and they want to make sure that they're not being wasted. They have limited supply. You can only find it in a few places. And it requires additional adherence and compliance monitoring to make sure that they're taking it at the right time, at the right place. A lot of specialty, not something that could be not necessarily taken at home, that could be something that you have to go to your doctor for, or an outpatient clinic facility to make sure it's being administered in the right way. You know, I also want to make sure that it coordinates with other disease states and the use of nurses and pharmacists to do that. And it also needs training and support to make sure that it is being administered the same way. Examples of specialty RX. Some of these names should look familiar because you'll see that a lot of them spend a lot of time on commercials, so a lot of them during the Super Bowl. The things that's talking about Crohn's disease, hepatitis C, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis. The thing about specialty medications is they are hyper expensive here compared to everywhere else on the planet. Now, the manufacturers will say that R&D is a significant factor in the extraordinary costs because it costs a lot of money to develop and meet their approval requirements. This also includes the cost of drug failures. Fewer than 1 in 10 pharmacy prescriptions that start in human trials actually get to FDA approval. So there's a lot of failure before you have a lot of success. However, another reason why the cost is so high is the cost is set by the manufacturer. It's not regulated by the U.S. The patent gives them the monopoly on a drug price that they set for themselves for a window of time that allows them to then make a lot of money, to earn back the R&D, but also to have large profits. What the patent does, all an FDA patent does is it proves that the it proves that the prescription is safe. It doesn't consider what the relative cost might be. But it's a slippery slope. So if drug profits are restricted or reduced, then pharmaceuticals become less attractive for investment. If they become less attractive for investment, you might have less investment, which could produce less research and new innovative cures. So a slippery slope to navigate. Whereas in the other countries see these drugs as a public utility, and therefore they can help regulate the price. How does the specialty pharmacy operate? They fill the high-cost biologics through multiple routes of administration. They offer support. So they're distinct from traditional pharmacies in that they coordinate aspects of care as well as disease management. They're designed to efficiently deliver these medications that have specific handling, storage, and distribution requirements. In addition, they're designed to improve the clinical outcomes with close contact and management with the physicians. They also want to provide the professional health cares that can offer patient education, again, making sure appropriate use, promote adherence. If they see that there isn't adherence, why isn't there adherence? Is it misunderstanding? Is it misinformation? Is it because of lack of funding? Because they also want to put people in line with financial need as necessary. So it's more than just sending it out. They want to make sure that there's a high level of patient care and satisfaction on top of all these other items, because those with the complex conditions, in order to treat them, they want to at least make sure that while they have to go through something, they want to make sure that it's as comfortable and as easy as they possibly can. Which takes us to the flow. Now we're going to work up a chart and explain to you how contracts interact with the parties and how the drug flows and how a prescription gets from the manufacturer to the patient. First, you start with the employer. Now, the employer works with the carrier. This assumes that it's carved in, that the PBM and the medical are being offered by the same entity. So that's Optum and UHC, for example. What you have there is you have a services contract. That services contract says that the carrier will offer them the formularies, the formulary decisions, at certain discounts, with certain guarantees, with certain dispensing fees, plus rebate setup. So it's the contract, what you've agreed to for integration with the medical plan. Now the carrier, the PBM, they have a formulary agreement with the manufacturer. So that formulary agreement says the PBM telling the manufacturer, we will put your drug on our list after they negotiate the price, in addition to determining what rebate levels are available. So the manufacturer, is in their best interest to work with the PBMs because they want to make sure that the drug gets on the list, because the PBMs are the ones who have access to all the volume of people that could need the prescription. Then you have the pharmacy. Pharmacy has a network contract with the PBM. So that network contract says the pharmacy agrees to participate in the PBM's network, and they will get reimbursed for the prescriptions that they dispense at a certain level, and they get dispensing fees paid back at a certain level, plus participating in any required programs the PBM may want them to offer. But you also have the wholesaler. The wholesaler we have spent a lot of time talking about because it's just in the background. You don't see it. The members don't see it. But the RX wholesaler is the delivery mechanism that allows the manufacturer to get the drug to the pharmacy. So they have a service agreement with the manufacturer that says that they will deliver the goods from the manufacturer to the pharmacy. So they get a hold of the prescriptions, they get a hold of the drugs, and then the pharmacy has an agreement with the wholesaler. They're the ones that are going to make the deliveries, kind of like a grocery store. The ones who deliver the milk, deliver the meat, deliver the vegetables, this is the relationship where the wholesaler provides the pharmacy through a vendor agreement the delivery of the drugs. So now we have the contracts. Who signed up with who? Now you have the flow of the actual drug. So based on the service agreement, the manufacturer delivers the drug to the wholesaler. The wholesaler then delivers the drug to the pharmacy. The pharmacy then dispenses the prescription to the patient. We now know how the drug gets from point A to point B, C, D. But we haven't talked about the money yet. Let's talk about the cash flow. So first, the manufacturer delivered the drugs to the wholesaler. The wholesaler has to pay to get those drugs. So they're out money for taking on the delivery. And they delivered it to the pharmacy. So the pharmacy then pays the wholesaler for the drugs that they then delivered into their inventory. So now the wholesaler's been made whole and plus margin, they'll make a profit. But now the pharmacy is out the money that they spent for taking delivery of the drugs. So based on their, I'm sorry, I got one step ahead of myself. They then collect a co-payment or co-insurance from the patient based on your plan design. But they're still out funds for delivery of the prescriptions. So based on the network contract with the PBM now pays back to the pharmacy for the amount that they laid out for getting the drugs from the wholesaler. So now the PBM is out money for paying the pharmacy. So then that ultimately leads back to the employer. The employer, based on their services contract, is now reimbursing the PBM for the money that they've laid out to reimburse the pharmacy. The PBM most likely made a profit between what they charged the employer versus what they paid the pharmacy, which leaves one more piece. That's the rebate. Remember, by the drug being on the list, eligible for rebate. So for those that are rebate eligible, the manufacturer pays the rebates back to the PBM. Based on contract, the PBM either keeps that rebate and offers deeper discounts, or they pass it through to the employer through a credit or through full pass-through. That's the flow. Now, what this doesn't take into consideration is the margin. Who makes what margin based on each of those transactions? In 201, we'll delve a little deeper into that setup so you understand what kind of margin the PBM makes, what kind of margin the pharmacy makes, so we can work on what best practice contract language is, because what you ultimately want to do is try to minimize the margins so that you can optimize your contract. That's the last slide in the webinar. So what we're going to do now is, as we talked about aggregating some questions, I think we have a couple that we want to talk about.
We do. So one, if you want to go back to slide 14, it's who decides which drugs are on which tier in the formulary. And so page 14, I think what you described is that there is a committee, and they're on for each PBM, and many are independent consultants, and they look at the clinical, the efficacy, and the outcome first, and then they look at cost as they develop the tiers or the structure of the formulary.
They do both.
Right.
Not necessarily one before the other. They do it as a whole. Because while the cost has a factor, the efficacy also has a factor. So they're trying to find the balance between the two so that they ultimately can figure out where it should fall inside the tier, which is why they leave room to adjust the list over time, because those decisions that they made, say, in the prior year, could change over time. So all of a sudden now it becomes more cost ineffective because something new hits the market that has better efficacy than the name brand.
And also, although typically in Tier 1 you'd find generics, you could find low-costing brands, and then in Tier 2, higher-costing generics. Because as we said, sometimes a generic doesn't have a competition to drive that cost down.
Correct.
And so the PBM is deciding on the tiers. That was one question. The next question is, but they are excluding individual drugs. And so what we were talking about is when an employer decides to exclude something from the formulary, which we don't recommend, they can't exclude and make the decision on a single drug based on a class. They have to either decide to cover it, an entire class, or not the class. So that was referring to the employer, that a PBM can exclude single drugs from the formulary as long as there is an alternative option for that prescription. So the formulary must maintain options for treatment for all covered services or covered diagnosis.
Based on the formulary restrictions of the strategy. Correct. So we're talking, so they have more power than the employer. The employer just can't look at all the drug lists and go, I don't like that one, and that one, or that one, or that one because I don't like the commercial.
And a lot of that has to do with they don't have the clinical expertise to be able to evaluate it and have all the cost and all the information required to make those clinical decisions. Correct,
because a lot of the decisions, we have conversations about that. The employer, what they typically see is they just see the dollar value. They see it as an expensive drug, therefore maybe it should be covered on the plan. But when you're looking at the clinical background, it's understanding the cost of that prescription when used appropriately with the right adherence levels. That's preventing something from occurring, complications on the medical side that can greatly outcost just the cost of that prescription.
Yep.
Which is why they leave it to the experts, because they know the full clinical integration.
Another question is, there's not an equivalent to Albagio. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right for MS. So I Googled that because Michael and I can't remember every drug and which drug has equivalent. We're not that good. And so there was an article on MS News today, but also on a pharma blog in November of 2018 that a generic was introduced. An individual may not be able to take the generic for the reasons that Michael stated. The color of the drug may cause a chemical reaction, or the binding of the drug. So some people can't take generics. And then another comment was it was Express Scripts who excluded a drug. And so a PBM, again, is able to exclude a drug as long as there's options or alternatives for that same diagnosis under the formulary. And remember, you can always go through 3 levels of appeal, and the 3rd level is required by ACA if, just like you can for medical, for drugs, in order to appeal to the PBM on the first 2 levels and then on a third-party independent review. And the last question was, why were over 300 drugs removed from Caremark and ESI on 1/1/20 formulary? So I will tell you, every PBM has multiple formularies, and they may even, depending on the size of the group, have a specific formulary, like for a P&G. So we can't speak specifically to that because we would have to talk to those PBMs, but what we can tell you is that just because ESI is the PBM doesn't mean that ESI dictates that formulary. And an example of that would be Medical Mutual of Ohio has a partnership with Express Scripts, ESI as their PBM. And what that means is Medical Mutual is actually deciding on the formulary and doing their own clinical and cost review, and not ESI. So it depends on who your administrator is and who they partner with on their formulary as to who makes those decisions and how exclusions or changes are made. And Michael, that was the end of the question.
Okay, these are all great questions. What that brings us to the end of PBM 101. I want to thank everybody for attending. We hope it helped build a foundation for our next session. If you're already registered, fantastic. It's March 11th, 2020 from 12 to 1. We're going to talk about pricing profits and potential carve-out. Specifically, we're going to start getting into the pricing jargon. You start hearing about WAC, MAC, and all the other alphabet soups when it comes into the pricing. We're going to start talking about how the PBMs make money, where the profit margin areas are. Start talking about the pros and cons of carve-in versus carve-out. What's the profile of what the employer side is good for considering it. Then talk about tools to bid. What options are available to you for bidding out your PBM spend. For those, again, who are registered, that is great. However, for those that have not registered, there's still time. We're going to send out a reminder email with the link that you can register moving forward. And we look forward to sharing more insight with you on PBMs in the next session, and we want to thank you again for your time.